Over the course of my career, I have had many people come to me for a consultation. And when I ask them, what can I do to help you? They explain, well, I've been here for 10 years. I want to apply for the green card. And I'd say, well, are you in removal proceedings? And they'd say, oh no, I've never even been arrested. But if I'm here for 10 years, I'm eligible for a green card. And I'd say, well, not really. What they're talking about is cancellation of removal. And it's a very common misconception that as long as you have 10 years in, and for some reason they think you need a clean record, then you can just apply. That's not how it works. By the end of this video, you're going to understand what cancellation of removal is. There's two different types. One is for people who have no legal status here, and the other is for people who are permanent residents but who have been put into removal proceedings. And it's a way to stop that from happening. We're going to talk a little bit about what the judges look for, whether it's discretionary or not. You know, as you probably know, or maybe you don't, if you're filing for your spouse, let's say, or you're filing for a family member, and you as the U.S. citizen would file the I-130 petition. Well, if they find, let's say we're doing a marriage case, if they find, and by they, I mean the adjudicator, they find that you have a valid marriage, they have to approve your I-130. However, your partner would then be applying for adjustment of status. That's under the I-45 form. That, however, is discretionary. If they don't like you, if they don't like the fact that you entered illegally, it just depends on who the adjudicator is. You know, they don't have to approve your adjustment of status. It's simply based on the discretion of the USCIS. So how about cancellation? Can a judge just say, well, you meet all the qualifications, but I don't agree with cancellation of removal, and in general I don't grant it, so I'm not granting it to you. Can they do that? We're going to talk about that a little bit down the road. I'm also going to talk about what mistakes happen, you know, what you're doing in your case that could prove very harmful to your application. So number one is, what is cancellation of removal? But before I get there, listen. If you're applying for this, it means you're in removal. And you need an immigration attorney, and one who does a lot of deport work. Not some notaria who's going to help you, and God, not ChatGPT. You know, I'm up on Facebook, and I'm in a bunch of these little groups. The I-130 group, the asylum group is horrible. There's a 485 group, and all I'm seeing now is DIY. You don't need to pay an attorney $5,000 for an application. Just go up on ChatGPT. They'll tell you everything you need to do. Or you can come in here, ask us questions. We'll do it. I did mine by myself. You don't need an attorney. Okay, well, it depends on how important your future is to you. But if you're in removal, you do need to have an attorney, okay? And someone who actually knows deport work. Having said that, most of what I'm going to be talking about is stuff that your lawyer should know. And the lawyer's going to be telling you that you need to bring in additional proof regarding A, B, and C. Listen to your attorney. Do what they ask you to do. Now, let's start. I'm sorry. After that little lecture. But I'm serious. You know, you're hiring an attorney to handle your removal case. Trust them. If you didn't trust them, you shouldn't have hired them. Why would you pay somebody a whole bunch of money and then just disregard what they say? Okay, foolish. Oh, because, well, my cousin said, or my girlfriend said, or they said online that. Trust your attorney. Get one you trust and stick with him or her. So what's cancellation of removal? It's a form of relief, okay? It allows a judge to grant you permanent residence, not just employment authorization. It doesn't grant you asylum. It grants you a green card, which is officially known as an alien registration card. It grants you a green card, permanent residence, and that card will be good for 10 years until you have to renew it. So it stops your deportation and it gives you permanent residence, right? Sweet. There's a lot of clients I used to have that it was their only hope to get a green card, because so many, I'm a Spanish speaker, so a lot of my clients entered without inspection. You can't adjust your status if you enter without inspection. So, they'd come into my office scared to death because they've been arrested for a DUI or something. For some reason, there was a raid at the place where they worked. For some reason, they got put into deport, and they're scared to death. And it's like, actually, this is not a bad thing, because you've been here for a long time. You have the right familial relationships. We might be able to do something for you. So don't automatically panic. If your attorney says that you have a pretty good shot at cancellation, take a deep breath and do what your attorney tells you to do. Like I said, there's only the main catch for this is that you have to be in removal. It doesn't work. In fact, many years ago, I had a client who had a wife, a USC wife, who was a little off, and he was a prince. He took care of her. She had lots of issues, mental issues, lots of problems. And he told me he wanted, this is during Obama's time, right? And he told me that he wanted to go down to immigration and turn himself in, as he's here illegally, and he wanted to turn himself in so that he could be put in deport so that he could then apply for cancellation. Well, this was not a good idea as far as I was concerned, because if you can avoid deportation, do so. But he was adamant, and he was right. I mean, he really had no other way of getting legal in this country. So I insisted that I go with him. And sure enough, we met down at immigration, sat there waiting. You have to talk to ICE about this, because they're the ones that are going to issue the notice to appear. And finally, an officer comes out. The officer won't let me go back with him, which kind of pissed me off, because I had taken the whole morning off to do this. He says, no. Counselor, this won't take very long. So he wouldn't, I had to sit there while I watched my client walk down the hallway. I'm thinking, shit, am I even going to see him? Is he going to get detained? But about 20 minutes later, they come back. The officer takes me out into the hallway to discuss the case with me. And he says, I can't put him in removal proceedings. I'm like, why not? He is here illegally. And he says, doesn't have a criminal record. And under this president, meaning Obama, under this president, we can't put anybody in removal who's not a criminal or doesn't have a final order. So I still remember that guy's name. So he couldn't do it. Because under Obama, see, the difference between Trump and Obama Well, one of the many. The difference is Obama focused. He was nicknamed deporter in chief because even up till today, he's deported more people than any other president ever. But he focused on the criminals and the people who had already been ordered deported but hadn't left. Trump is just kind of, we're going to deport everybody. Anybody who's here illegally is getting deported. And they have, he has this quota that he has come up with, or I should say Stephen Miller has come up with. We want to get rid of all these people here. Well, first of all, it's very difficult to do that. You need to be focused on this. You don't have the manpower to do that. You don't have the judges to do that. You don't have the trial attorneys to do that. There are millions of people living peacefully, quietly, doing jobs, living out their life, having babies, having grandbabies. They're not bothering anybody. Leave them alone. Get rid of the criminals. So that's what Obama did. That is not what Trump is doing. He just wants, I have no idea, but I think what he wants to be deporter in chief. He doesn't want Obama to have the most deportations. He wants the most deportations. But he's doing he's doing it in such a buckshot type of fashion that anybody that they can find, we're just going to round them all up. We're going to go to Home Depot. We'll bring all these guys in. Anyway. So that was the story of Roberto, that he tried to turn himself in, and under Obama, they wouldn't take him. I'm sure if you did that today with Trump, Trump's people would take you, but I'm also pretty sure you're going to get your butt detained. That's not the same thing as being let out on your own recognizance, or even have like an ankle bracelet. I'll bet you they're going to put you in prison. And then you have to fight to see if you can get a bond to get yourself out. So I wouldn't try this if I were you. But if you are already in removal proceedings, consider cancellation of removal. As I said, there's two types. One is for people who are already permanent residents but now find themselves in deport, and the other are for non-permanent residents. The rules are kind of different for both of them. So let's start with the green card holders first, right? You have to prove three things. One, you have to have been a lawful permanent resident for at least 5 years. Two, you have to have lived continuously in the U.S. for at least 7 years after your lawful admission. Three, you have not been convicted of an aggravated felony. Okay, that's a huge one. I think I've already done a video on what is an aggravated felony. It's a term of art. You can have a crime that's not considered a felony under state law, but is considered an aggravated felony, not just a felony, but an aggravated felony under the Immigration and Nationality Act. So I don't want to get too into the weeds with that, but a lot of them, what would be examples of, well, the big ones, obviously. You haven't been convicted of murder or rape. You don't have any serious drug convictions. Theft offenses, depending on the sentences, can be an aggravated felony. Certain crimes of violence, like simple assault, is generally not an aggravated felony. But it depends on the situation. And this is precisely why I tell you, you need to have an attorney looking at your criminal records. And don't lie to your attorney. Just say, well, I haven't really had any problems. I got pulled over. I had a traffic stop, but when really it was a DUI and you got arrested for DUI. Don't lie. Your attorney's going to need to see your criminal records. Any kind of fraud involving $10,000 or more. That's like if you wrote bad checks or things like that. And you can't, another thing, unfortunately, it doesn't matter how old these convictions are. They can go back to when you first came in. They can, if you had some kind of criminal records back home, they count. It's not just criminal records here, okay? Now, the other thing that I had mentioned above, discretion. This grant of cancellation of removal, it's not automatic. It requires the discretion of the judge. So even if you have your 10 years, even if you qualify, having done the things I mentioned above, they're going to look at your criminal history. They're going to look at your rehabilitation. Let's say you had 2 DUIs. That's a problem. Have you been going to AA for the last 6 years? Are you rehabilitated? They're going to look at your family ties. They're going to look at your employment. They're going to look at a lot of stuff. If you haven't been working, if you have no community involvement, like sometimes people are very much involved with their kids' sports programs or their church, things like that help your case. Give them a reason to want to grant you this relief. It's not, and again, judges, like I said above, there are some judges that just don't like it and don't want to grant it. And there are other judges that have no problem with it. So your attorney, that's another thing your attorney should know. If you have a local attorney, not one of these YouTube attorneys that I could represent you wherever you live. If you have a local attorney who actually knows the different judges and knows which each of the judges like, they'll be able to give you an idea if you have a good judge or a bad judge. So now the one that most people would talk to me about is cancellation for non-permanent residents. This is the hardest one to win too. You have to prove all of the following. 1, you've got 10 years continuous residence here. Physical presence. That doesn't mean that you came here as a student, you spent your year here studying, then you went home for the summer, then you came back a year later, and blah, 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 blah. You need 10 years of continuous physical presence. So you have to, not only that, but you have to be here for 10 years without major interruptions. That's kind of what I just said. Certain events stop the clock. Oh, that's another thing. Certain events stop the clock, okay? As soon as you get that notice to appear, as soon as that has been served on you, the clock stops, which is unfortunate because I've seen people who had 9 years here, 9.5 years here, and then something happens and they get a notice to appear, which if you haven't watched it, I'll connect this, I'll put the video I did on notices to appear as an end screen for this. You can click on that. If you haven't watched that notice to appear video, you should. That the notice to appear is the document that begins the removal proceedings. So the minute, not the minute that it's issued, but the minute that it's served on you, the clock stops. We were talking about criminal issues. A lot of times it's when you commit a crime, the clock stops. So, a lot of times right now, because the courts are so swamped, you might not be having a case. Your case might not come up for your first hearing for 6 months. And then they give you, I just saw somebody on Facebook, they said that they went to the hearing, the first master hearing. They said that they needed time to get they needed time to get an attorney. And the judge continued the case for 10 months. I mean, it used to be, even going back, 4 or 5 years ago, you got like 1 month. They would continue it for like a month. I don't know where, because they didn't list what court they were in, what city they were in. But that got continued for 10 months. Don't count on it. But you are allowed to go to one master calendar hearing without an attorney and then say you need time to find one. And they will give you a continuance. But I don't know if it's going to be 10 months. That's kind of what I was talking about. You're thinking, oh, great, because I'm not really in deport until I see a judge, right? Then it kind of hits you that you are in removal proceedings. But I've got an extra 10 months here. And that means with those 10 months, I have 9.5 months. With those 10 months, now I've got my 10 years. Doesn't work like that. Because the notice to appear was issued before the court. So it's not like the clock just keeps on running and eventually you can apply for cancellation. It does not. You're going to have to show good moral character for those 10 years. This is probably something up for debate too, because I know for naturalization, USCIS is changing what good moral character means. It used to mean the lack of bad moral character. No criminal convictions. But now with naturalization is sort of, well, what have you done for me lately? What else? Why? It's not just that you don't have a criminal record, but what's good about you? Why should we let you come in here? Why should we make you a U.S. citizen? So I have to presume that they're going to argue the same thing with cancellation of removal. That it's not just a lack of criminal problems, but they want to see some other reason. You have to understand, all these folks are under different departments. The Executive Office of Immigration Review, which is the courts, immigration courts, that's under the Department of Justice, not the Department of Homeland Security. ICE is under the Department of Homeland Security, as is CBP and USCIS. The people, they hate it. I remember when this first happened, which goes back many years, the attorneys for immigration, which is when you go to court, you have your attorney, and then at the table next to you is the government's attorney. Trial attorney, they call them, at least in Philly, we call them trial attorneys. They're under ICE. They hated that. They didn't want to be known as being under ICE. They wanted to be known as being under the Department of Homeland Security. Well, anyway, the Department of Homeland Security, or the trial attorney, can argue to the judge that they, meaning you, haven't met the requirement of good moral character for 10 years. Because even though you don't have a record, you haven't presented anything that shows you're especially of special good moral character. We'll have to wait and see how the judges feel about that. I'll tell you one thing. The judges, like I said, under Department of Justice, the judges hate being told by the government what they have to do. They hate mandatory things. So, but again, it depends on who the judge is. You might have one who used to be a trial attorney and is now a judge, and he hates all immigrants. Or you might have somebody who had been a defense attorney and does his best to bend over backwards to help the immigrant. Depends on who your judge is. So you need to show good moral character for 10 years. That means no serious crimes, no false claims to for U.S. citizenship. That means no voting in elections. That means no having... My cats are now fighting. Oliver! Oliver! He's biting his brother. Oliver, leave him alone. Okay, one moment, please. He always does that. And what's the matter with this cat? He fights with his brother for no reason. For 16 years they've been fighting with each other. Anyway, no false claims to U.S. citizenship. By the way, there's no waiver to that. If you voted in an election, there's no waiver. You've held yourself out as being a U.S. citizen. There's no waiver. If in the past you've used the birth certificate of a Puerto Rican, because you needed something to be able to get work, to be able to have work. Well, that's holding yourself out as being a U.S. citizen. If you're going to use bad papers, use bad papers of a permanent resident. Don't use bad papers of a Puerto Rican. Big mistake. No habitual drunk driving. Certain drug offenses. They really hate the drug offenses. Oh, another thing. Things like child support. It's very important. Anytime you need to show good moral character, and that's wherever. That might be with an I-130. There's lots of different things. Asylum, that you have to show good moral character. If you have a child that doesn't live with you, you have to show that you've been paying child support. And you can argue, well, I'm not ordered to pay child support. It doesn't matter if you're ordered to pay child support. We're talking about good moral character. It's morality. You have a child that needs your support and you're not supporting them. If you can't prove that, how do you prove that? Either, if you are under a court order and you've been paying, you can have a printout from your court, your family court, that shows how often you've been paying. And I would show it for the last 10 years or whenever it started. If you don't have that, you need a letter from the mama. A notarized letter from the mama saying that, yeah, he supports our child. Every week he sends whatever, $100, $200, he sends $500 a month. She needs to write a letter saying that you support the child. So if you're not on good terms with mama, start being nice, because you're going to need that. Sooner or later, you're going to need that letter. It might not be until many years from now when you have your individual hearing, but sooner or later, you're going to need her help. And I don't understand why a woman wouldn't help you with that, because unless you're like a real pain in the XYZ, if you're a jerk and she wants you deported, get this guy out of my life, then I understand. If you can't get this relief granted to you because she won't give you a letter, what the heck is she thinking? You're going to get your butt deported because you don't have any other relief, let's say. Then she's not going to get a dime from you. As long as you're here, you will continue to support the child and in a way, support her. So I don't know why they wouldn't write that letter, but, sometimes couples have problems. Another thing you need is you need to have a particular family member relation. You have to have either a United States citizen or permanent resident, spouse, parent, or child. Now in this case, your children count. They don't always count. Like when you have to do waivers and stuff, they don't always count. But they count for these. So you have to show that you have a permanent resident or U.S. citizen, spouse, parent, or child, and that person would suffer exceptional and extremely unusual hardship if you were deported. Now, what the heck is that? Well, it's not enough to say, well, I'm the It's not enough to say, I'm the breadwinner. We have 3 kids together, and, how is she going to raise the kids if I'm not here? Well, you could be sending money from whatever country you're going to be living in. You could be helping her that way. So not that it's going to lower her income, that's not sufficient. That how will she survive without me? She needs me. That's not enough either. Because obviously if somebody is removed, of course it's going to be hard. There's going to be hardship, absolutely. He's going to be missed. and it's going to be a problem. But that is not, I would say, exceptional hardship, but it is exceptional and extremely unusual hardship. I've always said just exceptional hardship. Exceptional and extremely unusual hardship. Same thing, another thing that's not good enough is I'm the only one who speaks English. So maybe she's a permanent resident, but she doesn't speak English. Well, that's a hardship, yep, but she's certainly capable of learning English. Separation from the family, that's just, I'm sorry, it's just normal hardship. It's not exceptional. But what could work? Serious medical conditions. And I might even say they don't have to be that serious. But if you have a kid, for instance, who has autism, that could certainly be a problem. Your attorney would want to be showing some evidence of what life, because here's another thing that judges are going to say, is that, look, they don't have to separate. Everybody can go back to country X and they can all live happily together. And then the U.S. citizen child who was born here, assuming that the Supreme Court hasn't changed that yet, but then the child who was born here can live with mommy and daddy and there's no problem. However, if you could show that in the home country they're not going to be able to get the treatment for autism that they have here, or they might have special needs, they might have ADHD. There's all sorts of different, they don't have, it's not like the kid has to be in a wheelchair or the wife has to have ALS or something. It doesn't, I mean, they don't have to be completely, totally dependent, but you need to show some exceptional hardship. Okay? For instance, when kids have special needs and, what are they called? Oh my God. IEPs, I think they're called. Ugh, I forget the name. But I have always sent in, when I've had clients whose kids have special needs and they have special classes and stuff, I've always sent in stacks of their IEPs. I'm sorry if that's not the right name for it. It explains how the schools are going to help the kids, you know, what the diagnosis is and what the school is doing to help the child, who the teachers are, and when they've met with the parents and all this stuff. So please leave a comment and let me. My kid's an elementary school teacher. She's going. Well, thank God my children don't watch my videos. But yeah, leave a little note. So, and one of the last things you can talk about are the country conditions too. You know, how dangerous is it in the home country? Like, I wouldn't want to have to take my family down to live back in Mexico, especially if there's USC, you know, you have little kids that are U.S. citizens. Because guess what? A lot of U.S. citizens get kidnapped in Mexico and in Central America, and lots of other countries too, for that matter, because they think their parents have money. I mean, could be you're going to have to submit a bunch of country conditions that explain what's going on in the country and the safety of the children. The Department of State has a lot of bulletins about each country and whether it's safe for U.S. citizens to go there. So that's all stuff, generally speaking, that the attorney takes care of, or should I say the attorney's paralegal takes care of. So that's what you need to be able to get this approved. I am at some point going to be leaving, I haven't done it yet, but at some point I'm going to give you a list. I'm going to give you a copy of my table of contents, a typical table of contents for cancellation, because this doesn't, you just don't bring all the stuff to court. This has to all be put into a package that your attorney does, and it has to be It has to be paginated, meaning it has to have the numbers, consecutive numbers at the bottom. In Philly, they have to be 2-hole punched. If they're not 2-hole punched, they'll get shipped back to you. Of course, some of the cases now are just being done online, but that means you also have to have little pages separating each of the exhibits. So what I'm planning on doing is doing a PDF, and I'll put that, sooner or later, I'm going to put that into the description so you can just download that. Don't take my advice over your own attorney's advice. You can certainly show this to him or her. You can show them my list that I do. But if you're going to pay a lot of money for an attorney, trust your attorney and use his or her advice. So why do some of these cases fail? In fact, most cancellation cases fail. I think one of the reasons is that people, they underestimate how hard that hardship has to be, right? It's a pretty high standard. It's not just, she needs me. For instance, let's say the only person you have here, you don't have a wife, you don't have kids, but you have a USC father. You have a father who came over here a gazillion years ago. You didn't really know him when you were growing up because he left to send money back home. And then through the years, he was able to get permanent residence. And then eventually he became a U.S. citizen and he applied for you. That's how you got your permanent residence in the first time. But he lives down in Miami and you live wherever. You don't see each other. He might be very ill, but you're not taking care of him. He's got a wife who takes care of him. Maybe you have a sister that lives with him or lives close to him who takes care of him. So just because you have the relationship and the person who you're related to has medical issues doesn't mean that that's going to be enough. You have to show that this person, have it be wife, have it be spouse, parent, or child, depends on you. Okay? So that's one of the reasons you think, that's good enough. That should be enough. Why isn't that enough? My theory has always been for the last 40 years, give them so much evidence that they can't say no. Just keep giving them as much as you can possibly give them. Make it impossible for them to say no. Okay? The next reason that it's often denied, which is basically the same thing, evidence is weak or poorly organized. Well, if you're using an attorney, there is no excuse for the evidence to be poorly organized. And I don't, like I've said now multiple times, if you want to do cancellation of removal, get yourself an attorney. Okay? Because this is just not something that people DIY. They just don't. And it's very, very serious. And you get one bite at the apple. You can't do it, screw it up, and then say, let's have an attorney fix it. No, it's too late. The other thing that causes some problems, and this again, I'm going to lay at the feet of the attorneys, is that, one of the things you're going to have to do is testify in court. Of course, that's at the very end. That's with your individual hearing. You can testify. Your relative can testify. They're probably not going to want the little kids to testify, but if you have family members or you have neighbors or you have priests or you have whoever can testify on your behalf, but you're going to have to testify. One of the things I always have in my cancellation packet is an affidavit from the immigrant who's in removal. A big, long 3, 4, 5, 6-page affidavit explaining how you got here and the relationship with the family member. Going through the whole, I'm not going to get into all that, but this big, long affidavit regarding your relationship with this person and the hardship that that person has, and why it's so important for you to be by this person's side to help them. Well, if you then go up on the stand, and let's say you have a kid that's got ADHD, and in truth, it's usually your wife who goes to the meetings, but you go to some of the meetings with the teacher. Well, you go up and you're going to testify in court, and you go through 15-20 minutes of testimony, and now we're getting to the meat of the exceptional hardship, and the trial attorney says, you know, Mr. Gomez, what's the name of your son's teacher? And you don't know? What's the name of his school? When was the last time you went to one of these meetings with your son's teacher? What was the last thing that the teacher suggested that you and your wife should be working on with your son? If you don't know this shit, you got yourself a problem. Because obviously, it's wifey poo who's taking care of all the stuff. And when I say this is why I leave it at the feet of the attorney, he or she should be giving you a packet of the entire thing that you did, right? The packet of everything. So you have your own copy, which means you have a copy of the affidavit that you wrote. You need to reread that. Remember the dates. Remember the first time he had a problem. When did you first notice this? You know, say, well, I think he was 3. Oh, really? He was 3 the first time? Yeah, he was 3. In the affidavit, it says he was 5. You know, if you testify one way, but your affidavit says something else, you've got yourself a problem. Because, like I said, this is discretionary. The judge can say, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it that this child needs him here. He's got his mother here. He doesn't need his father, too. So that's, you're going to run into a problem if you don't know dates, names, places. You have to walk, you know, do this as if you were applying for citizenship, and you have to study all of those 100 questions until you have them burned in your brain. Same thing before you do your testimony for the cancellation case at your final individual hearing. Make sure that you know dates, times, places, important facts of your case. Evidence that makes or breaks your case. Strong cases include medical record. Oh, that's another thing. If it's going to be based on a medical issue, you have to have the medical records of the person. You also need a letter from the doctor, at least one of the doctors, that explains the diagnosis. Let's say this is for your wife. Your wife is quite sick with something. You need a letter from the doctor on letterhead that explains what the diagnosis is, what the prognosis is. That means, you know, what they think is going to happen in the future, what kind of treatment that person is receiving, what kind of medications that person has. You might want to do psychological evaluations. They get pricey. They can be $1,000 or more, but you might want to do psychological evaluations regarding either the family situation, or just you and the child, or you and your parent. Have these psychological evaluations. Again, this isn't that some psychologist from the neighborhood goes and talks to people and then writes a 1-page letter. There's a way to do this, and they're generally 6, 7, 8 pages long. The psychological evaluation as to what the impact would be if you had to leave and if you were deported. So that's very powerful. The problem is that's really costly. However, you got to do what you got to do. So keep that in mind. School records and IEPs. There it is. Oh, it is IEPs. So you need the school records, the IEPs, country condition reports, which I already mentioned. Tax records. Well, you need the tax records. In fact, we had a judge in Philly that wouldn't even look at a cancellation case unless you presented 10 years of taxes. So, well, I didn't pay taxes. Well, guess what? Now you are. You're going to go talk to an accountant and you're going to pay taxes for the last 10 years because she wouldn't even entertain the application if you hadn't done that. So you're going to need tax records to show you've been paying your taxes for the at least the previous 10 years. You can get letters from employers, teachers, doctors. Expert testimony depends on it depends on the situation if you need expert testimony. Where weak cases rely on personal statements, they don't, you know what they don't need? They don't need handwritten letters from your friends and your neighbors and some, family members that say, Jose is a wonderful person and his family really loves him and it would just be so horrible if he had to go home. Please don't deport him. Okay, they don't need shit like that. I mean, I'm sorry. They need letters like that from employers, perhaps, doctors, perhaps, ministers, perhaps, even like if, let's say you're somebody who helps out on your kid's Little League team, and the head coach could write a letter and say, you know what, Jose's fantastic. He shows up every week, helps these kids. The kids love him, and he loves them, and his son is so dependent upon him. He's very reliable. Stuff like that, that's fine. Just not these little letters that I've seen a million times. And say, oh, Maria, she's such a wonderful person. And it's like, if you're going to have somebody write a letter about what a wonderful person you are, have them give examples. For example, when I really needed her because my husband broke his leg, or for instance, one of the things I did for a friend of mine who lived right up the street from her daughter and my youngest were going to kindergarten together. They went to the same school. Well, she came and told me, and she's not she's just a normal, natural U.S. citizen, but she was expecting her second kid, and the doctor put her on bed rest. And she asked me if I would be willing to take her daughter over to school, just stop over at the house and pick up her daughter first. And then her husband would be able to pick her up after school. That's the type of thing that if you have a neighbor that you've done something like that for, great. If you work at your local food pantry, you volunteer at a food pantry, great. Those letters, very helpful. Just somebody saying, I've known them for 10 years and she's wonderful, please don't deport her, that's not going to work. And as I said, organization matters. Judges don't like sloppy cases. So, final thoughts. I'll tell you one thing. When you get granted cancellation of removal, so wonderful. It's such a relief. Oh my God, the judge says, I'm going to approve this case when there's a visa available. This is another one of those things. I was just talking about this on my latest live stream, that we need comprehensive immigration reform. The last time I had a cancellation case, because I'm now at this point retired, it got approved by the judge September 2021. Okay? Approved by the judge. He didn't get his letter granting him permanent residence until January of 2025. Took 4 years. God knows what it is now. It's probably more now. So just because it's going to be approved by a judge, it will be approved by a judge when there's a visa available. And that you have to check on the visa bulletin. Your attorney should be able to keep you abreast of that. And so, again, let me just say, this is for informational purposes only. Do not take this as legal advice, even though it is exactly the same legal advice I would give somebody who's coming into my office for a consultation. However, each case is different, so make sure you listen to your own attorney. If you liked what you heard, if you got some value out of it, please hit like, please hit subscribe, and I'm going to put, it should be somewhere, there's going to be a link to the notice to appear video that I had. And that's it for right now, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao.